Welcome back to another Stampede Blue Colts cast, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Matt Danley. Thank you guys all for coming back. Like I said, we're going to start doing these quite a bit more often. We're going to get to at least a 3-a-week schedule here on the Colts cast. But this week, and probably running into most of next week, we're going to get through each position or at least position group throughout the Colts roster. And we're going to kind of get ourselves primed for what to expect out of the team in 2018. There's a lot of unknowns with this team. We went through the defensive tackles the other day, and we kind of added Tyquan Lewis into that group. One of the rookies, Kemoko Turay, we're putting him in the defensive end group. I just see those two kind of playing in those roles a little bit more. It's a fun group to think about up in this front seven. It really is. We've got a lot of unknowns in linebacker. We'll get to those as we move on throughout each position. But there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of fun, though, with this group up front this year, especially. I mean, that defensive tackle unit, in my opinion, is pretty deep. I think this defensive end group can be pretty deep, too. And I think that we're going to be pleasantly surprised at what, if everyone's healthy, at what everybody can really do for this defense, especially with the new scheme changes and so on. So, again, thank you guys for coming. And we'll hit into these defensive ends right now. And let's just start with Kemoko Turay because he's one of the guys that I think most Colts fans are excited about. There was a lot of intrigue through him or on him throughout the draft process and everything. And I think that I had him somewhere around 7th as far as ranked among edge defenders for the Colts with our with what we did with our scouting guide or whatever it was, our draft guide. And I think that he offers the Colts a lot more than what he did at Rutgers as an outside linebacker. He's going to be playing with his hand in the dirt most of the time for the Colts, as far as I'm concerned. I know Chris Ballard's pretty much said as much, but he could be similar to, and I've made this comparison before with Turay, but I think that he really has a potential to be used or come on the scene, I guess you could say, similar to how Yannick Ngakoue did in Jacksonville. Wasn't used in a whole lot of snaps immediately, but made an immediate impression and really improved the Jaguars' pressure and sack game. So, I mean, I think that he is going to be bringing a lot of that with him, but I also kind of see him being used similarly to Barkevious Mingo from last year, not comparing the two players as similar, but comparing them to is I think that they'll line him up at outside linebacker occasionally as well, just to get his speed and his length on the field. They're going to have some young linebackers, a lot of unproven linebackers. I think you get a guy like this who's played linebacker last year and a guy who is he's coming into a brand new scheme for the most part, 3-4 at Rutgers all the way through. Okay, basic anyways. And I think that you bring a guy in like that where he's got to transition into basically a new position like some of the guys did last year. I think that he's going to be a guy that they move around in that regard, whereas Lewis will maybe move around from defensive end to defensive tackle. I think Turay will be defensive end and linebacker at first until he kind of gets a little bit more polished. I think that they really want to work on him and his skills and techniques and everything else his rookie year. But I think he's just so talented and so athletic and so explosive that you're going to see him coming in on stunts. You're going to see him being rushing the passer on third. You're going to see him in some coverages, in my opinion, as well. So a guy who really broke onto the scene as a freshman at Rutgers and then went on throughout with some injuries, really came into his own last year, as far as I'm concerned, as far as an all-around player in that 3-4, more of an outside linebacker type player, and ended up getting 60 total tackles, only had 3 sacks, but that's not the game he's going to be playing in Indy. So one of the guys that I'm more excited about than others with this group, not to mention he's a rookie. Like I said, I think he's got a lot of good pass rush moves. I think he's got a lot of power for a guy who's 6'5", 260, 253. That's a lot of length and power as far as I'm concerned. I just hope that he can translate to the NFL game and that he can kind of get himself into that defensive end role, because that would be nice to have him, Basham, Lewis, a threesome already set for the future at edge defender, I think. And you just don't want one of these guys to kind of fall off and, kind of lose the importance within the scheme. Sorry, I got to clear my throat. I had my wisdom teeth one of my last wisdom tooth taken out. So sorry if I sound weird and kind of clearing my throat. You guys know if you've had wisdom tooth constantly with the stuff going to the back of your throat. So my bad on that. Hopefully I don't ruin the show with it. But I think Turay, anyways, is going to be one of the better rookies for the Colts this year all the way around. Let's move on to a guy like Chris McCain. We haven't heard much about him because of his issues or perceived issues. Whether the situation with him is real or not, that'll be probably one of the questions we ask right as training camp gets underway, find out what's going on with him. But he's an undersized guy, both weight and height. I mean, he is 6'5", but he's a small 6'5", in my opinion. But he's 236, one of the lighter defensive ends in the group. Lots of explosion. Had an excellent year last year in San Diego, or LA, I suppose. Had 5 sacks, only 19 total tackles, but it was definitely a guy who did not see a ton of snaps. He was not a guy that they were relying on to kind of hold the fort down. He's definitely a complimentary pass rusher, and he's going to be a guy who's, obviously trying to make the roster. But I think he's a guy that if he does make the roster, he definitely adds a different speed to that position than the majority of the guys that are in that role. So I think McCain is really right now fighting the roster, to be quite honest with you. There's a lot of guys in front of him. I don't want to say this is a deep group if we're comparing to other NFL squads, but I think it's a deep group for the Colts this year. This year, I think that the Colts probably legitimately deeper there, at least on paper, before we get into camp, than they've been in a couple years. So I think this is a good position for the Colts. I think they're going to legitimately do quite a bit better than they have in the past. So not sure about McCain's future. John Simon, another guy that we kind of have been hearing about. He's undersized and this and that, and that, technically he's only 6'2", but he's right at that same weight as the other guys that are going to be playing that position. So he showed last year so much heart throughout the season until he ended up getting hurt and wasn't able to play anymore. But man, Simon really came with it last year in the 9 games that he did play. Only 3 sacks, but I mean, we were close to 40 or over 40 tackles, I believe, last year in 9 games. And he was a constant piece for the Colts. He was definitely one of the better defenders on the team last year. He ended up being a guy that they stunted quite a bit. He found some success rushing the passer. He definitely didn't have as many sacks as he had, knockdowns and pressures. There were so many of those while he was playing last year. I thought he had a really good season for his availability, or considering his availability at least. I don't necessarily feel like he's fighting the roster, because I think that he's a guy that they can move around as well. Is he as effective as some of the other guys that have, a little bit of versatility? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I wouldn't say that he's as athletic, but I think Simon knows football. He's a heck of a football player. One of the guys that I was really happy that the Colts signed in free agency last year. And I think that Simon this year is going to come out and prove that, probably he's a guy you need to be happy that you hung on to and that you weren't letting go of him. Simon's a guy that I see him getting the snaps, and it's not because some of this youth isn't good enough necessarily. I just see it because he's got an amazing work ethic, and he's just a guy who's always going in practice, and always one of the guys that looks good in practice. So here's one of the things that I'm looking for from him in training camp. Is he more explosive than he was last year? I hope so, because if he is, he's got a real chance at a lot of snaps. I mean, there's a couple guys that I think that are slotted to start there, and I think that that's obvious. We'll get to them obviously, but Simon's going to pull in some snaps. I mean, if one of those guys don't perform, if some of the other guys don't work out, if there's injuries, John Simon's going to be one hell of a third guy in the rotation as far as I'm concerned for this defensive end group. So look for John Simon, in my opinion, to play really well this year. I just don't see him on the roster long term, probably past next year. So, I mean, a lot of that depends on what happens this year with some of the younger guys, especially at that position as well. So let's get to Jabaal Sheard. Sheard is obviously the most touted returner for the Colts at this position. 5.5 sacks last year. Just a little bit more. I mean, I think about 10 more tackles than Simon had, close to 50 or just over 50. Played all 16 games, though. That's huge for him at this point. He has to be a guy that comes in this 4-3 and fits right in right now, because this is what he came into the league as. And let me tell you, if you go back and watch some of his tape, Jabaal Sheard is one of the most explosive guys that you don't know about if you didn't watch the Browns when he was a rookie. He comes off that line hard. He gets a lot of pressure. I think he's going to be better. He's better suited for this. He was bulked up last year, being a 3-4 outside linebacker. But this year, I think he's going to be able to drop some pounds. If he's not dropping weight, he's going to be leaner and he's going to be stronger. And I think that, whether it's some body fat or whatever it is, I think that you're going to really be excited to see what Jabaal Sheard puts on the field. He's had at least 5 sacks in his past 3 seasons. He was, like I said, definitely his most productive season since his second year in Cleveland. And his first 2 years, he had almost 16 sacks, 15.5 sacks in the first 2 years. I think that he's going to return to that form. I think he's a double-digit sack guy as a 4-3 in this scheme. The question is, if he's not the guy that's going to be sitting back being more of a run defender, even though he's a guy who can benefit and can help this defense legitimately in the pass rush. That's going to be kind of something to watch. I'm interested to see that. How do they account for the run defense? Is this literally going to be bookends like back in the Mathis and Freeney days where they're sending two guys, boom, every time, and then maybe a third or an alternate after that? What are they going to – I mean, I'm interested to see how they actually do that, how they divvy it up. Very seldom did you see Mathis and Freeney in those days sitting back in any kind of run defense. It was go. And this is going to be a lot of fun to watch if the Colts do that. It's going to be rough for their run defense also if they do that. So I'm interested to see with that. But Jabaal Sheard, to me, he deserves to get the start this year if he's anything like he was last year. If everybody else is the same and he's the same, at least – even if some of the other guys are better than they were last year, he still deserves to get that start. Now, Sheard's going to have a lot of weight to pull, in my opinion, though. He's not the youngest guy on the team. He is one of the most experienced, and he's going to have to be a leader. So he's going to have to both do that on the field and get these guys, help these guys get in shape and be one of the workers on the team, in my opinion, because I think that's going to go a way for him in his future. Don't necessarily know what the long-term plans are for him, but this year he's the guy, and that's just, I think that's about as plain as can be. So let's go to the other guy, and the other guy is Terrell Basham. Terrell Basham is the guy who's coming in off of his rookie year, played completely out of sorts from what he did in his days in college at Ohio. This is a different thing for him. I mean, him coming into this is just like them opening up the doors and telling him that, here we go. Now we're going to see what you can do. This is what we drafted you for. You took a year, you got some knowledge, you learned another scheme, you were able to learn how to actually be in coverage, you learned how to do some run defense, all this other stuff. He's going to need a secondary move, though. Even if he's in a 3-4 point stance, he needs a secondary move. I just don't see how he could not have one. It's necessary for him. He has to have it, because last year we expected to see it. We never saw it. Late in the year, we saw a couple flashes. Nothing consistent, though. Ended up with less than 10 tackles on the season. Got 2 sacks. I think a couple of those were, I think that at least one of those was a coverage sack anyways. He was honestly at the position outplayed by Barkevious Mingo. I don't think that that's really debatable, to be quite honest with you. But Mingo is a better fit there. Again, Mingo came out of college in that role as a defensive end and as an outside linebacker, and he's had enough experience in the league to where he can learn all that, play it, and be a contributor. Basham didn't have that luxury. He's got to be the guy this year. He's got to come in and prove that that he is who Chris Ballard thought he was. They were kind of disappointed at first because, he wasn't realizing some of the potential they had for him. He's got to prove it. He's got to prove it this year because he's got guys on his heels now. He's got Tyquan Lewis and he's got Kemoko Turay. Those guys want to come in and prove a point. And Turay's an inch taller, a little bit lighter. Tyquan Lewis is a little bit heavier, about the same size. I mean, those guys are basically, it's put up or shut up right now for Terrell Basham, folks. Believe that. I don't necessarily wouldn't say that he's, a goner after next year or anything like that if he doesn't perform, but he's not going to be the starter. I mean, he just won't. Those guys coming in are going to be on his heels in a heartbeat. So Terrell Basham's got his work cut out for him. He should be the starter. Pending everything goes well through camp. And I say he should be because he's the guy they drafted to do this. They need to find out. I mean, I don't think you're going to find out in camp, just in camp. You're going to see some of him. Hopefully they see the work ethic and they see some production from him in camp. I can't wait to watch him because I want to see him blowing it up and I want to see him getting the attention. I want him to be the one getting it all. And it's not because I liked him come out of college. It's because he didn't have it last year as a rookie. He needs to be the guy, like I said, put up or shut up. Come in there, knock some people out, get to the quarterback, and we'll have to see what he can do. But I'm excited to see Terrell Basham. He's got to be the guy this year. Overall, so far, I think you see what I mean, and there's a little bit of depth. There's some good starting pieces there, but this group as a whole. I think we've still got some work to do, but we're going to come back real quick here in just a second after a quick 5-second pause for one of our last defensive ends, and we're going to give you final thoughts on this group here as a whole as the Colts get ready to head into camp. All right, guys, thank you for coming back. Had to get my drink and clear the throat again, but on from Terrell Basham again. Just real quick, catch back up. He's going to be a guy who has to get 5 to 10 sacks this year too. Colts cannot rely on pressure, just pressure. There's got to be some real production. There's got to be some real numbers coming out of this. One of the guys that is kind of being forgotten was kind of a tweener last year for the Colts on the practice squad. I believe he was on the practice squad most of the year. Anthony Johnson. Comes in playing at New England, Miami, and the Jets. He's played 2 seasons right now, and he came in 2014, skipped 2015, apparently either wasn't on a roster or was injured or something. But 2016, he played with the Patriots and the Jets. Not a real productive guy, but he hasn't gotten a lot of playing time either. So depending on what role he was used in, he's another guy that we really don't know a bunch about. He's got the right size. He's got the right build to be one of the power guys on the defensive end. He's probably a guy who is learning this coming out of the defensive tackle position, or at least something to where he was considered to be versatile and was working both. I'm excited to see what he's got. I'm excited to see his work ethic after coming out of New England and the New York Jets. I mean, he definitely has some of the backdrop from coaching and whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do, if he can even push for a roster spot. Like I said, I think him and McCain right now are most likely the 2 guys on the way out. But if you take them 2 out specifically, the rest of that defensive end group, it loses a little bit of its muster. You lose a little bit of the power from Johnson, and you lose a little bit of the speed and the explosiveness from McCain. So that's something that they're going to have to get from Turay. They're going to have to get, improved explosion, I think, from Simon, even though he's he's an adequate guy in that department. He's not bad, but I just think that he needs to be extra explosive this year. He's going to be half the guy who's going to have to really show his athleticism as well. But then Sheard and Basham, after that, I mean, like I said, you lose a little bit of the extra. You lose a little bit of the one trick guys to come in and do what they do. But overall, not bad depth for this group. I think that there's considering that Tyquan Lewis is going to move in and out of a defensive end slot occasionally, I would assume as well. They've got even more depth, so you have to consider that a little bit. Just looking at this group, though, final thoughts. I really love what we got in Kemoko Turay. I think he adds a lot for the future. I think he's a guy who can produce now out of pure athleticism and speed and toughness and want to. I think that Kemoko Turay is going to be a fan favorite very early in the season. So I'm excited about him. I definitely think that he is a guy who needs to stay healthy too. He's a guy who's really excited about being a professional athlete right now. I think if you've seen his Instagram or anything like that, very proud of what he's doing. His family's proud. You just want to see a guy like that stay healthy. So much celebration, and you just want a guy like that to stay healthy and produce and do all those things that you expect from, kind of an unsung rookie. A guy who's overlooked a lot through college, was a fan favorite in the draft community, but not much outside of that. So he's a guy I'm definitely looking forward to, excited to see what he can do this year. Talked about McCain, kind of a one-trick guy, but was successful last year. You want to see what he can do. He may not even get a chance, guys, because once camp gets here, if he's not there and this situation's not resolved, the Colts may go in another direction. It may just be that simple. He may never even get a chance to try. So that is yet to be determined. Of course, like I said, that'll be one of the questions that comes up early. Looking at the combination of Sheard, Basham, and Simon, those are the three guys. Those are the three guys that this defense is going to have to rely on. These three guys getting to the quarterback. Nobody knows what we've got in Turay. At least this is common thought from the coaching staff and everybody else coming into the season. We don't know what Turay's got. We don't know what Lewis has. We know what we've got in Simon, Sheard, and we hope that Basham can take that next step. These are the three guys that are going to be relied upon to really be the bread and butter of this defense. These three guys have to all be close, in my opinion, for the Colts to be in a position where Andrew Luck can be the deciding factor in a close playoff race down the line. If the Colts are even in that ballpark, they've got Andrew Luck, he can get them into the playoffs. We know this. Those guys, all three, have to be 8 sacks or more throughout the season. They've got to have, at a minimum, a ton of pressures and some knockdowns, some batted balls, a couple of interceptions, something like that. They've got to be impact players. They cannot be guys who rush off the edge all the time and have nothing to show for it. The Colts can't be in a situation. They were absolutely god-awful last year with only 25 sacks. I mean, the Colts haven't even gotten, 42 sacks, I think was the most they've had under Pagano, and I think that was in 2013. The Colts haven't had 45 sacks since 2007, if I'm not mistaken. That's a long time for 45 sacks, or 2005, I'm sorry, because that was the heyday, right? That's what we need. We need at least 2 guys who can get really close to that double digit, if not get double digit sacks, and a complementary piece that's more than 5, 7, 8, maybe 9. They've got to get some help from the defensive tackles, the linebackers, and everything else. This could be one of the most exciting front fours that we see, the rotations. We talked about the defensive tackles. This defensive end group really does a nice job, in my opinion, of complementing what they've got up front and on the interior of the defensive line. Those 3 guys have to be those double-digit guys. They have to be all year. And to be quite honest with you, they've got to be able to do it consistently, and they've all three have to have, a complete season. That seems almost unheard of because of the Colts injury history, but there's a lot for the Colts if they can get these guys up to par. There's a lot for these guys if they can get the supplementary pieces together and just contribute a few sacks here and there. Even if they're coverage sacks, they're still sacks. They're a loss of yards. So that's what's important for the Colts defense going forward. Last year, the Colts, under 4 yards a carry for the first time in a decade. That was the 2007. That was the first time the Indianapolis Colts defense had held the opposition throughout a season to under 4 yards a carry, folks. Now we're going to a 4-3. It's going to be really interesting to see with this group, the defensive tackles, what they can all do to help the Colts get back to kind of stopping the run as they did last year. Jonathan Hankins was a big part of that. He's gone. Al Woods, he was a huge part of that too. He's still here. They've got some new pieces up front. They've got some guys rushing the edge this year. And I think the Colts defense, to me, when you look at it this way, and I know where we're going. I know where we're going into the next positions. And so do you. There's a lot more talent. There's a lot more potential. There's a lot more upside to this defense than a lot of people, and virtually anybody, is giving the Colts. There is also a potential for disaster, but the potential's there. This is going to be an amazingly fun camp to watch. Going to take you guys through it all. And, we're going to report as much as we can on these guys and see where they're going, how they're growing and progressing. And, what we're seeing in camp and the practices and then in the drills and so on and so forth. So it's getting an exciting camp. We're 2 positions in, guys. We've got the front 4 basically and all the key parts and the supplementary parts to that. We've got them knocked out. We're moving back in the defense. We're going to do linebackers next. So we'll talk to you guys again soon. Thank you for joining me here on the Colts Cast. Make sure you guys are rating and reviewing the podcast on Apple Podcasts. And always go to Stampede Blue for all your Colts news and analysis. We'll talk to you guys later right here on the Colts Cast.